NSFW, Forensic Scientists of Reddit, what is the most WTF case that you ever had? X Digital Forensics. Drug dealers love taking photos of their girlfriends in their underwear. They also love taking photos of their stash. The genius is hardly ever turn of location services. So each photo is geotagged. I dated a drug dealer and he did take a lot of photos of me in my underwear. He also always texted me photos of him building little animals out of weed and toothpicks. So I suppose in a way you are exactly right. That's oddly adorable. The building part. I don't get it. But I'm smiling. Father-in-law is a cop. Years ago, he got called to a scene of a suicide by hanging. The body had been there for a while. Apparently the deceased had managed to do quite a bit of damage to his neck vertebrae, because his spine had snapped and his neck stretched down several feet from the noose. The cops at the scene took pictures of giraffe neck and passed them around the department. Somehow, my wife saw the pictures when she was at the tender age of 12. Which screwed her up good enough to be a suitable mate for a guy like me. Prof showed a case where a guy committed suicide by holding 2 forks on a table, then proceeded to headbang towards it. Stuck both his eyes in. A friend of mine is a forensic scientist and her department dealt with burglary cases only. Usually generating pretty uninteresting stuff to tell people. But her only good story is that once she got a pair of gloves found at the crime scene. She went to examine them and felt that there was something hard inside. She turned the gloves up to get it out. And out falls a thumb. Ripped off at the first joint. Apparently this particular burglar was holding up a safe while his mate went underneath it. Dropped the safe on his hands. Ripped his hands out and ran. They obviously caught the guy. Not a forensic scientist. But a true story is good all the same. Officer I used to know was telling me of this kid's suicide. The parents had left for the day and the kid decided enough is enough. He grabbed his dad's shotgun and sat down on the sofa. With the shotgun in his mouth. He pulled the trigger. Blood, brain, and teeth covered the entire room and ceiling. The blast created a huge hole in the back of his head. Since the gun was in his mouth, he just sort of slid down the barrel. The parents come home and walk in to see their son sitting on the couch. Shotgun in his mouth with the barrel protruding out of the back of his skull. Not me but my professor. This young kid, teens-ish, was playing with a loaded gun and accidentally shot himself in the face. He then tried to write "help me" on the wall with his blood. So sad. We saw the scene photos for class. Edit, wow. Okay, my most upvoted comment, and it's not even my case. For those who have questions. All the details of the case were never discussed, including where it happened, name, or circumstances surrounding it. A lot of cases my prof didn't even know the final outcome, so we heard a lot of interesting cases but never knew where they went. I ended up in an FS lab, so no CS for me. Why did he write it on the wall? His mind was elsewhere. Attended a lecture by a pathologist once who asked us what household item someone had managed to heal themselves with, a toothbrush, a rubber band, or a matchstick. He went on to tell us that a man had healed himself accidentally while trying to clean his ear out with a matchstick. Punctured a blood vessel. Painted a wall with his own blood. Passed out and bled out on the sofa. A friend is a psychologist whose previous life was in crime scene photography. She went to the scene of a suicide in a garage. This guy had a project car that he had worked on his whole life. When he decided to end it all, he wanted to go with the car. So he shut the garage and turned on the engine and waited. To top it off, he had taken a bunch of pain and sleeping pills. When my friend got there, it was a good while after his death. EMTs and other specialists were there looking for details and whatnot. He was the VP of a fairly large chain of local businesses. So there was an insurance settlement to consider. My friend is in the middle of photographing the scene and the guy was laying there. Pronounced dead hours ago, and he suddenly just shook hard. She thought it was a death rattle, so she kept taking pictures. Eventually the guy sat up and nodded, and the EMTs were called back in to stabilize him and eventually save him. Apparently the car had run out of gas right at the moment he went out and he was pronounced dead on the scene. He couldn't talk or do much, but he had actually survived. Forensic chemist here, who occasionally gets called out to crime scenes just to consult on evidence collection. On the first one I ever went on, a father had shot his adult son and put the body in a deep freeze that was in his bedroom. There were a ton of cops and other people from our lab there. But when the coroner asked for help removing the body from the freezer, I volunteered quickly, as I had never been that close to a dead body, other than funerals, and was curious. As I helped the coroner lift the body out of the freezer, which still had a bunch of food in it too. A pack of frozen biscuits was stuck to his body. I had to pry them off of him, which was both very weird and kind of funny at the same time. EMT here. We had a guy who was naked, bloodied, and tortured, then left outside in -10-degree weather until he froze. We found him literally frozen maybe a day after the fact. Now, my question is, how the hell do you move a 230-pound popsicle without breaking it? Edit, words. Put a glass over him and slide a large piece of paper underneath. This is a story from my fake uncle, a forensic officer who has leading a team of juniors in a suicide case. The victim of the suicide had filled a water pressure based fire extinguisher with explosive material. He didn't go into detail, and hugged it like a teddy bear. Naturally when he went off and out with a bang he went all over the roof, walls and floor. My uncle proceeded to find a foot with all the tendons hanging out and paraded it in front of the juniors and pulled all the tendons making the toes wiggle. His only regret was not finding a hand. Always fun around the most macabre of my father's friends. Not a forensic scientist, surprise, but my mom knew a lady whose son committed suicide pretty brutally. While the parents were out, he got a shotgun from the gun cabinet, went to his room, and set it up with string and pulleys on a chair so that it would go off when the bedroom door was opened. He sat in the chair for what may have been hours. Parents get home. Mom goes to check on son. Bang. That poor woman needed some serious counseling. I can't imagine the guilt. And it was pretty shitty of the kid to make one of his parents unwittingly do the dirty work for him. Not a crime scene guy. Used to be a first responder. Guy was sitting at a table, slumped over, with every single knife from a very nice knife set sticking out of his back, arranged just the way they were in the knife block. Wife was standing there, still yelling at him for dying too soon. A mate works at the hospital and his friend used to be the coroner, and one day he's like, come down and check this out. The guy had a middle-aged Australian Aboriginal lady lying on the slab dead as dead can be, and the coroner explains death was the result of a shotgun blast. It wasn't SSH but instead birdshot from an estimated 50 feet away, and he say to my mate find the pellet holes, so he's looking and finds 3 of them. One was in the leg, another in the neck, and another was in the abdomen. The last one in the abdomen was the pellet that killed her because it penetrated the liver anyway. The coroner said good on you, well done, but you missed one, there 4 pellet holes in this woman. So my mate's looking and eventually he gives up, so the coroner said look at the back of her hand. The last pellet hole was on the outside of her middle finger. She had been giving the finger to the person who shot her. Worked at an Mies for a bit. Had a couple pass away from a 2-person plane crash. When the autopsy began it smelled a bit like burnt BBQ, and the people in the body bags weren't in your typical dead lying flat position. They were kind of stuck in a fetal position-ish. Opened up the bag and I saw weird bumps on each of their heads. Asked the ME what was up with the bumps. I guess at high temps the brain expands and needs somewhere to go. At some point it just kinda pops out of the skull. So their brains were some inside some outside of skull. Then we try examining the body, and it looks like a cheap prop from a movie. I notice a wedding band on the female passenger and try my best to remove it. The whole finger comes off with it. Felt kinda bad. Then I spent 10 minutes trying to clean off what I can only imagine was human grease and burnt flesh off the ring so we could package it up and eventually return it to the family. Plane crashes are pretty crazy. My cousin in a coroner, and the worst was he came to get a body in a trailer during the summer. Man had been dead at least a week and had burst. He said the smell was the worst of his life. He and the other guy were up to their ankles in fluids and had to throw out his clothes and shoes. His boss felt so bad that he bought them each a new pair of like $300 shoes. A man tried to grape his wife, and when she fought back, he took her by the ears and smashed her head repeatedly on the corner of a table until her head became concave. When questioned by the police, he said he had found her lying down upon coming home and gently shook her to see if she was awake. It was like that when I got here has its limits. From a family friend. People who do lots of yoga involving rolling their head around the axis of their neck, over time it wears away the corners of the vertebrae. Which is why you're not supposed to do it. He saw a few cases of people getting into relatively minor car crashes. What should have been a nasty case of whiplash instead becomes fatal as their spine was weakened and can't stop the momentum of their head. So it just pops right off the spinal column. The head doesn't fly away or anything, it's still held on by muscle. But the driver is just as dead. I worked in a morgue for a while. Lots of weird things. One case in particular stands out. A man was found dead in a food truck. He looked pretty normal from the outside. After we took off his clothes, things started looking a bit odd. He was wearing women's underwear that had holes cut in them for his pen 15. He probably had on around 20 pairs of the underwear. He also had a pen 15 pump on his pen 15 with a few condoms on. I don't remember what the cause of death was. Wonder what his family thought about it. Maybe not the most gruesome, but definitely one of the weirder things I saw. Retired undertaker here. Duck hunter in gear found dead on front porch. Looked like shotgun went off and hit him. Close range in the chest. Got him back to funeral home for autopsy, small town. He had been stabbed about 30 times. I was called to perform an X-ray examination on a burn victim. The victim was significantly charred. Much of the body mass had been burned away, but large portions of the quadriceps and gluteals remained intact and exposed. When I walked into the morgue through an airlock, the smell was sweet and pleasing. It smelled distinctively like barbecue chicken, and for a brief moment, made me hungry. That single case bothered me more than having carrion beetles crawl off of a body and onto my face. Made an account and quit lurking just for this thread. Crime scene tech here. This one stands out as I was still training at the time. Suicide by gunshot. Guy went to an indoor range and rented a monster of a revolver, a Judgefire Ike. This thing could shoot 410 shot shells. The force basically blew the top of his head off. What remained of the skin from the top of his head was flapped into the skull cavity and his eyes looked like they were bulging out. Blood and brains up to 10 feet away. Found his safety goggles about 10 yards down range. The scariest part was he was watching others shoot beforehand. Sometimes I wonder if he planned to take others with him. It was a long time ago, retired now. Miami unit investigated overflow cases, basically cases that the main unit wouldn't need to waste resources on. Came down to us. We would get things like accidents and suicides. Open and shut. Sometimes we got more intense cases. The one that stuck. It was the first time they actually warned me before opening the body bag. The death was reported as an accident. He fell from the balcony of his apartment on the 12th floor into the tree beside the building, hitting every branch on the way down. Turn out his mother pushed him. The result was a grotesque mess. I was at a regional medical center in rural Guatemala when we had a case come in from an RTA, road traffic accident, involving a pedestrian and a chicken bus. For those of you who don't know, a popular, but incredibly dangerous, form of public transport are retired American school buses that have been painted all sorts of vibrant colors, but underneath the mechanics are shot to sheet. Anyway, this pedestrian had been hit by one of these rolling death traps which was fully loaded going around 80 miles per hour and ended up getting wrapped under the front right wheel arch and completely mangled beyond recognition. They found bits of this guy spread to kilometers down the road as the initial impact had split his torso down the middle and basically turned him inside out. When all the bits had been collected, the height of the body bag was around 2 inches, so you imagine the state of the remains. Passers-by helped us pick up bits from the side of the road, but dogs and cats ran off with a fair amount of the smaller bits. Guatemala is a cool place. I had a professor who was an expert in osteology and would train radiologists and doctors to recognize defensive fractures in arm bones. Defending yourself from an attack can leave a very distinctive spiral fracture on your forearms. And in his years of research, he'd never encountered that specific fracture pattern anywhere except in a defensive wound. Until he was attending a seminar at the University of Toronto in February. And when leaving the lecture, he was walking down an outdoor flight of stairs when someone called out to him to ask a question. He had his hands in his pockets because he wasn't wearing gloves. Turned, slipped and fell while perpendicular to the steps. His forearm hit the step and resulted in the exact spiral fracture he'd never seen anywhere else. And best part is that the radiologist that examined him was someone he himself had trained to look for this sort of fracture as a warning sign for domestic violence. Digital forensics case. Executive was using way more data than anyone else on his record. The local IT guys took it to check it out for viruses and whatnot. Found lots of child porn. Guy got brought up on charges. Lost his job. Family torn apart. The whole spiel. We do our analysis. Find out there was a virus they were serving said pictures for a dark website. Only thing that got him off was the rate at which the data was accessed. He got fat restitution, but that won't put his life back together. Made me get out of the business because I know this guy was guilty for sure, but we kept finding little hints that suggested it was something other than what we thought. Had we missed something? He would be in jail as we speak. Couldn't sleep with that kind of burden. I'm a specialty forensics investigator that focuses on fire and explosions. Somehow, a lady with a coffee can of gas, her husband's asphalt-covered work clothes, and a front-load dryer managed to turn the dryer into a rocket ship that launched through a plate glass window and 10 feet into the road. We have no known models that can demonstrate how the available materials were able to launch the dryer. A friend's wife does forensics field work for a sparsely populated area and had said that only one case has been noteworthy. She was asked to analyze a crime scene in a house used to manufacture meth. She surveyed the outside and then proceeded with an officer to the kitchen where the basement door was located. In the basement they found a metal door bolted shut and they decided to call for bolt cutters to enter. They didn't have them at the time, so she kept examining the area and found a side door to THR room behind a furnace. The lock was jimmied open and they found a sawn-off 12-gauge shotgun had been pointed at the bolted door. The gun was loaded and the tripwire still attached to the shotgun. She described it as the most chilling experience of her career. Late to the party but saddest case was two brothers out hunting. The older one, 14, shot the younger one, 12, accidentally when he saw a deer. He hit his brother square in the back of the head, which leaves quite the exit wound on the other side. Yes, he did flip him over and see what he did. Feel bad for the kid. Most WTF. Crackhead on her period with a week-old pad. Yes. She used the same one for a week. Threw it at a cell. Good. I got to take pictures of the pad. Was pretty gross, but at least I didn't get hit by the pad. The coolest forensic story I heard was in a forensic math seminar a few years back. This case was, I think, used as inspiration for an episode of Bones. A guy held his daughter but didn't report her missing until 8 or 9 months later. When they did find her remains, they were able to prove that she had died months before. The father claimed that he last saw her because there was a wasp nest in her skull. That particular breed of wasp only builds nests in dry places. So she had to have already been decomposed prior to their nest building season.